Yeah, this is so exciting. Look at all these people who are joining us. Rachel Gogo all the way from California via Paris, Kevin Bethune in Huntington Beach, Emma Steinhobel, who's come to every single one of these. I notice a lot of familiar faces. I feel like Mr. Rogers. Hello. I am not Mr. Rogers. I'm the Mr. Rogers of Design Observer. I'm Jessica Helfand, and I'm welcoming you here tonight to what I think might be our last studio session of the year as we head into the holidays and lockdown. But I don't know, this one might have to go on for a couple days because we have so much to say and show and do and talk about. This is a really great group we've assembled for you tonight, led by my new friend, Maurice Cherry. What is there to say about Maurice Cherry? Mathematician, designer, podcaster, host, scholar, gentleman, ephemera geek, like me, and fellow lover of magazines and magazine history. I started my career a million years ago, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, as an editorial designer. So when we logged in with our guest tonight and I saw those magazine covers behind Margena Christian's face there, I just let out a whoop of delight, which I think you all will too, and she's got more to show. So we've got a lot of people and not a lot of time. Over you, Maurice, to introduce the evening and your guests.
Sure thing. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jessica. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I think this will be a really great conversation, a look down memory lane, as well as probably some conversation, just food for thought for the future. As Jessica stated, my name is Maurice Cherry. I'm the founder and host of Revision Path, which is a weekly podcast where I interview Black designers and developers online. Uh, Today, we're going to be talking with Brandi Davis and Dr. Margena Christian, both whom worked for Johnson Publishing Company. Johnson Publishing Company is the parent company that put out Ebony Magazine, Jet Magazine, Ebony Fashion Fair, you name it. They put out a lot of things, a lot of documentation and magazines and things for the Black community. I'll have each of them kind of tell who they are. Brandi, why don't you start it off?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I am a graphic and web designer. I have been designing for over 17 years. As Maurice mentioned, I started my career fresh out of college as an intern at Johnson Publishing that ended up turning into about 8 or 9 years there, where I left as the senior designer producer of the web department. And I feel like it provided a good foundation for what I went on to do in other industries. But I truly enjoy designing, and I definitely love discussing the history of Johnson Publishing because it is a gem. And to be able to work there and experience it in its in some of its heyday, because I came in sort of toward the end of Mr. Johnson being alive and there, but just to experience it in those 8 years was amazing. So I look forward tonight to just sort of recapping some of those stories.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Christian.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I started my career at Johnson Publishing Company in 1995. I began with Jet Magazine, their weekly publication, and I was with Jet Magazine. I started as an assistant editor. Then I went from assistant to associate, and I ended as features editor. And in 2009, as the company was going through a transition, I was moved from Jet Magazine to Ebony Magazine, its sister publication, which was the monthly. Throughout the course of my tenure at Johnson, I ended in May of 2014, but I wrote for not only Ebony and Jet, but also EBONY Man, EBONY South Africa. I wrote the history for the EBONY Fashion Fair, and also I wrote for ebony.com. I am currently a senior lecturer at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where I helped to develop and to design its professional writing concentration in 2015, the year after I left Johnson Publishing. Everything truly is in divine order. And at the research institution, I am able to educate students about the publishing industry. And I learned from the best, the late John H. Johnson.
All right. Thank you both again for taking time out for this today. I do have just a couple of questions. I think probably just to kind of start things off, why don't each of you sort of talk about your memories of Ebony Magazine and Jet Magazine growing up? Like, what do you remember about them before you started actually working there?
Ooh, for me, I was just thinking about this the other day. I was so small, and I remember the old Ebony magazines that were so large you had to hold them with two hands. And as a kid, I remember they would be stretched out across the coffee table. And then I remember Jet magazines, they would be stacked up and they'd start leaning to the side and fall over. And I loved looking at the pictures.
Mhm.
The pictures in those magazines stood out to me in both Ebony as well as in Jet. But something I lived for was the Ebony Fashion Show. Every year, my mom, my sister, our grandma, we would go. And I remember leaving the fashion show thinking, I want to be a model one day. So I started drinking a lot of milk because I read that if you drink a lot of milk, it's going to make you get tall. And I read the back of the book where it said you have to be this height without shoes, this size, and all of that. When I realized I wasn't going to grow, I realized maybe I need to just kind of leave that alone. But those magazines were the world to me. I loved entertainment. I loved reading, and they were like family members in our home.
Brandi, how about you?
Yeah. So I don't know, Margena, if I ever told you this story. I believe, Maurice, I told you in our last conversation. But I actually, my sister named me from reading the Ebony magazine and saw someone's name, Brandi, in the magazine. And I was slated to be Camille after Camille Cosby, but my sister saw the name Brandi in the Ebony magazine and was like, you have to name her Brandi. And so that is sort of like where my first introduction to Ebony comes into play, because of course, having all of my grandparents and my aunts and everyone had Ebony and Jet magazines across the coffee table. Like that was a given. Any trip to the Carson's store, Fashion Fair Cosmetics was my mom's first stop, you know, of making sure she had everything she needed for cosmetics. But it was always that full circle story of once I started working there, my sister gave me the whole, like, it is almost like you were meant to work there, because literally I remember, she's like, I remember flipping through the pages and seeing an interview with someone's name, Brandi, and told mom, like, you can't name her Camille. She has to be Brandi. And so for me to start working there 24 years later, you know, was almost like surreal to them. But I do feel like I was placed there for a purpose. But yeah, I remember having just the Ebony and Jet magazines and flipping through. So you wanted to be a model. This is kind of, I don't know if I should admit this, but I always wanted to be the beauty of the week.
Okay.
In Jet, I would flip through and I would just be like, they are so confident. How are they doing this? Like, how are they out here with the swimsuits on? And I always wanted to be a Jet beauty. And I would just flip through. So when I got to the company and started working on the site with Angie, she gave me like the Jet beauty sections to work on. It was like, yes, I get to like, I'm like, I'm one step closer to becoming one, although I was so far off. But it was almost like that was my way of like full circle of wanting to be a Jet beauty, realizing that was probably never going to happen. But at least I got to work on the features.
Wow. I mean, for me, like, yeah, Ebony and Jet were just these, it was just omnipresent growing up. My grandmother had she still has a fireplace in her house, but it doesn't work anymore. And I remember it was sort of like the thing that she kept the wood in was just stacked with Ebony magazines. I mean, she didn't burn them. They just happened to be inside the thing next to the fireplace. But the magazines were always there. They were always something that I remember just looking through. I think at times, like, I would use them in school projects and things like that. Like it was just always available. It's funny you mentioned the beauty of the week thing, because I remember my this is a funny story. So when my grandmother would go grocery shopping, she would take me, and it was sort of like our thing. Like we would go to the grocery store. I'd be like a little kid, maybe like I don't know, like 6 or 7 or something like that, and we're in Winn-Dixie going up and down the aisles. And I remember we'd get to the checkout, and I would always grab the Jet because she always wanted to grab a new Jet. And every time I would go to the Jet, the first thing I would turn to was the Beauty of the Week, and she'd be like, "No, don't look at that." Like to her, in her eyes, she was like, "This is like pornographic. Like, why are you looking at these women inside this magazine?" I'm like, "But it's in the magazine, you know." But yeah, Ebony and Jet were something that were always around. I always wanted to be in Ebony because I grew up in a small town in Alabama. For those who don't know, I grew up in Selma, Alabama, and like you didn't really see a whole lot of positive representation of Black folks kind of reflected back to you in that way. And Ebony, I remember Ebony specifically was just so aspirational in terms of like what it reflected back to you about what Black people were doing around the world, not just celebrities, but just regular people. I remember there was always this section at the very front of the magazine. I think it was called like Strictly for Business or something like that. But they would always profile like 3 or 4 people that were doing something interesting. Like this person works for NASA, and this person is an accountant, and this person. So you got to see these representations of Black people doing just kind of amazing things that didn't have to do with entertainment or sports or anything like that.
Yeah.
So how did you two kind of first start? I know, Brandi, you mentioned coming right out of school. Can you talk about that story?
Yeah. So I joined an organization when I was in school. When I was still in school, I joined a designers for it was designed for Black design. It was Black designers. I can't remember the exact name, but it was a Black designers organization that was on the south side of Chicago. And so it was probably a group of maybe about 10 to 20 designers, different of different areas. And every week, one Saturday out of the month, we all meet and sort of just discuss the state of design, what we're working on, how as an organization we could impact youth within design. And then of course they would discuss opportunities that were available. So in this group, Margena was Marty. So Marty worked in on Jet magazine. She was one of the editors. And so in the group is one of the Jet editors. They post that Johnson Publishing has a need for a graphic designer. Well, I was doing web only, so I sent it to a friend. And the friend sent it back to me and was like, "No, I checked it out. It doesn't say graphic design. It says web design." And so she was like, "You should apply." And so I applied and ended up interviewing with Lydia. Lydia and Angie interviewed me, and I started there as an intern in like 2003. By I think like the summer or right at the end of the summer of 2004, I started full time. And so that sort of progressed. I think I was full time there as web designer for about 4 or 5 years, and then got promoted to a few different titles. But yeah, I started, I just happened to be in a design group with one of the Jet editors, and they were posting jobs were available. And I was, by chance, I applied because I literally was like convincing my friend, "You should do it, you should do it." And she's like, "This is not for me. It is clearly a web design role." So that's how I ended up starting at Johnson.
Dr. Christian, how about you? I remember you said you started in 95, correct?
Yeah, I did. How I started, I was actually a sixth, seventh, eighth grade language arts teacher in St. Louis, but I also had an entertainment column in St. Louis as well. And in my mind, I felt like I had reached the pinnacle. I had interviewed Bobby Brown and Janet Jackson, and it was time for me to move on to higher heights. So I saw an anniversary issue of Ebony, and in it was a story where Linda Johnson Rice said, "We're always looking for young, new talent, and I'm always actively searching." And so I thought to myself, I'm going to write a letter. And just so happens there was a woman from St. Louis who was friends with an editor at Jet magazine, and the editor was Trudy Moore. And she said, what you do is so similar to what my friend does at Jet Magazine. You should reach out to her because she might be able to assist you in some way. And I said, okay. So I reached out to Trudy, and Trudy said, I would suggest that you write a letter, apply. She said, but do not tell Mr. Johnson that you know me, because he's going to come and ask me and I don't know you. She said, so don't use my name as a reference. I said, okay. So I sent a FedEx letter to Linda Johnson Rice, and I quoted what she said in the publication, and I sent in my clips, and I got a call, and they flew me in. I was so excited to have this little trip from St. Louis to Chicago. It was like to and from. And one day, I mean, they flew me in and sent me right back. And in this interview, I actually interviewed with Linda. And then Mr. Johnson walks by, and I could feel my heart racing. I was like, this is the man I was seeing in the magazines. And I was so nervous. And so he comes in and he takes over the interview. And he ultimately, he was saying things where it made me think, well, why is he saying this? I thought he brought me here because he wanted me. So he was saying things like, now, why do you want to work at Johnson Publishing Company? And there are a lot of magazines you could work for. I mean, you could go to Essence and you could go to Black Enterprise. I mean, why us? So he was asking these questions and just kind of, and then it dawned on me, he wants to see how I think on my feet. So I told him, I said, Mr. Johnson, come over to the table and I can show you some of my work. And he laughed and he said, oh, you certainly have fire. And so he looked at all of my stories. And now there was a time when Bobby Brown was the king of the stage. And I remember Mr. Johnson looked at my Bobby Brown story and he said, oh my goodness, you interviewed Bobby Brown? Wow. So he looked at all of these stories, and when I applied, I said I wanted to work for Ebony. I actually had the hopes of reaching out to Lerone Bennett, but at the time he was on sick leave. So Mr. Johnson said, well, I'm going to tell you, with Ebony, the people who have the longest tenure are going to talk to the celebrities. And since you like to talk to stars, you'll probably be able to talk to more of them if I put you at Jet. So that's how I ended up at Jet Magazine as an assistant editor.
Wow. That's quite a story. He came in and just took over the interview.
And I still remember Linda with her hands like this. And as he was asking those tough questions, I could see her looking like cringy, like, oh my goodness, I hope he doesn't run her away. Just feel it. But he like sat behind her and he was like, just kind of like going at it. He just like took over and she just kind of got quiet. So yeah, that stood out. But I got a call probably 2 days later offering me the position.
Nice. For both of you, what do you remember the most about your time at Johnson Publishing Company? I'm sure there's tons of stories and we can get into individual stories, but what do you remember the most?
For me, of course, the assignments that we had are all memorable. But for me, I feel like what we accomplished at Johnson the most was a family unit amongst all of us that worked there. Even to the point that after we are not there now, we all are just as tight and close because of the fact that we shared this great experience. So I always describe going to work at Johnson after I got through that first 6 months of shock that I actually worked there and refused to talk about it to anyone. After that first 6 months, it was like, yes, I go to work with my favorite cousins every day. It's like literally going to grandma's house on the weekend every day for work. So it's like, no matter how difficult our projects were or how many hours we had to put in to make sure we met deadlines, we were doing these projects and finishing them with people that we truly loved and respect and knew that we had each other's back. And so for me, it was the family that I gained from working at Johnson. For me, that is always the most memorable. I have so many stories of just different people that I have met, different managers I've had, just different events that we would attend because they were mandatory. And like, who's mandatory? Why is it mandatory to attend a party with celebrities? I don't know, but I loved every part of it, you know? And so it's just that for me is always what is near and dear to my heart. It's just the family that I grew from working there.
And I'd like to echo what Brandi said, that family relationship, it was, we knew everyone by name, because what was unique is that it wasn't a revolving door during our time. People stayed in those positions for decades.
And
yes. People who left and came back. And sometimes Mr. Johnson's joke would be, oh, you'll be back. And those people did that.
And they would come back.
Yeah, some would come back. So remembering that family unit, but also even during our most difficult times, it still felt so pleasurable. As Brandi mentioned, working, sometimes we would work 7 days a week. I mean, I would have assignments on Sundays, and it didn't matter if that assignment was in the wee hours of the morning or in the late night hours. It was like we were constantly working, but it was so much fun because it was just a pleasure to interview, to talk to people that you grew up watching and admiring, and they were reaching out to you to share their stories. And it was just always fast moving. It was also a place where a source of pride, because I saw people who looked like me. And everyone was so well dressed. Everyone was very fashionable, had his or her own savvy. It was just a glorious place to be. And as Lerone Bennett used to say, we were there doing the glory days, as he called them.
And now I see you have two covers in your background there. One is of Ebony magazine, one is of Jet magazine. I think you have a presentation of some covers. I'd love, if we could see that.
Sure, yes. Let me get settled with that. And I'm gonna share my screen with you.
All right.
All right. Okay. And should I move this? Are you guys in the way? Can you see yourselves?
Yeah, this is fine.
Okay, so then I'll just move this up. All righty. So this is so each of these covers I have a story behind. I want to show you that in December of 2003, this story about Tyler Perry was actually pitched for something called a In the Spotlight, which was going to be a new section for Jet magazine. And when I got the information, I read it and I found that this man on the Chitlin circuit or with urban stage plays had quietly become a millionaire. And I thought to myself, this is amazing. My mother loved him, and so many other church-going African-American women would flock to these plays. So it was given to me for a one-page story, and I went to the meeting and I said, Mr. Johnson, do you think that we could consider something more? Because this man is quietly a millionaire with stage plays that people flock to. And the people who read Jet magazine are the people who go to his plays. And he said, oh, I never thought about that. So he said, yes. Well, people were fuming because they were like, what did she talk him into? How is he going to put a man on the cover in a dress? So what happened was Tyler Perry actually, this was his first national cover for any mainstream magazine ever. Wow. And he actually designed this cover. And Mr. Johnson had hesitations, not so much about putting a man on the cover with a dress, but for people who are familiar with Medea, she is a pistol-toting granny. So she had her purse in one hand and in the other hand, she's holding a gun. So Mr. Johnson said, we can't have someone on the cover with a gun. That's not going to be good for advertisers. So Tyler said, okay, well, I'll take it back and I'll redo the cover. So what he did was, the suggestion was, since people really didn't know him, let's do this picture of Medea and him in a suit. So what Tyler did was, his body is actually in front of the gun, okay? But he designed that cover. The next picture is in 2008, I did a cover story for EBONY magazine with Tyler Perry. And the interesting thing is that because of this cover story with EBONY magazine, that is how I was moved in 2009. When the company went through a reorganization, they moved me from Jet magazine, the weekly, to the monthly publication. And they did that because they knew that I had the ability to write for both. And I had demonstrated that. So I credit Tyler with allowing me to move from one position to the next at Johnson Publishing Company. And what's really interesting about this Tyler Perry connection is the new company of EBONY magazine. In March of 2020, this was the last magazine that they actually published, and it was an online app. And you guessed it, they reached out to me to interview Tyler Perry. So it was a full circle moment.
Wow. Wow.
This is an example of what EBONY magazine would do. We did not dip our toe in the water to figure out the temperature of what everyone else was doing. We put the thermometers and we turned up the heat. No one dared put this couple on the cover. America's Next First Couple dared dream, and that's what we did. And we know what the result ended up being. But this spoke to what EBONY magazine did. And they were on the cover of our February Love issue. And it was one of our most popular issues every February because people love couples and people love those types of stories. But this spoke to being inspirational and aspirational. Whether he reached for the stars and didn't make it, this was something that we felt, let's put it out in the universe and let's see what's going to happen. This is also another wonderful history with EBONY magazine. John Johnson dared to call these children from Indiana the hottest young group in history. And they were just coming out. They were just picking up steam. And he put these beautiful brown boys with the big afros on the cover. That was September of 1970. In December of 2007, none of us knew or could have ever dreamed that this would be Michael Jackson's last cover. He started his career with EBONY and he ended it with EBONY. He was also mentored by John H. Johnson. But with this cover, Jet senior editor Sylvia P. Flanagan, I watched her for a year work to gain Michael Jackson's trust because he had just did the big story with Martin Bashir, and he felt that he had been double-crossed and his faith in the media was very slim. So for a year, she reached out every week. She was patiently persistent until one day he agreed and said, yes, I will do the cover. And this was his last cover.
Wow.
For any national publication. This is one of my favorite covers. And the person who actually did this layout design for it is in this gathering with us. But I use this cover because it illustrates what we saw at Johnson Publishing. Each day we came to work and we saw beautiful Black people, males, females. This was on the set in Canada for the Best Man holiday. It feel like work. Even though my day started at noon, I did interviews and I did my very last interview on the set at 1 o'clock at night. So it didn't feel like work. It was so much fun. But this was a split cover that we did with the men and a split cover we did with the women. And to me, this is illustrates the feeling that I would get going to Johnson Publishing because we would see people who looked like us. And that meant something. This was a cover. It was actually under the leadership of Brian Monroe. And this was after Mr. Johnson died. He died in 2005, but Brian Monroe was the first person to take over the company's editorial components after the death of John H. Johnson. And this was a cover series that did really well. People would go to the newsstands and they would try to get each of these issues, but it was the Black Brothers of Cool issue. And you guessed it, Barack Obama was the top one. And you'll often see that picture. Everyone was so excited. My president is cool. And this illustration just also spoke to the pride of African-American men, the various dimensions of who we are as well. In 2010, by then we had another editor-in-chief of Ebony magazine, and it was Amy DuBois Barnett. And she dared to do something that I thought was really cool. She looked back while also moving forward. And we did these replicas of historic covers. There's Taraji P. Henson, and she is actually, we have this parallel of what the late, great Diane Carroll did on an ebony cover. We had Dr. King and we had Samuel L. Jackson. And they should both stand out to you, Maurice, because
they're Morehouse men.
Morehouse men, yes,
Exactly.
yes. And then we had Sidney Poitier and we had Blair Underwood. So this was very creative, and I loved what she did with it. It's important that we look back, but keep moving forward, but never forget. Never forget. This was a set of covers in 2013 that really stood out. We were dealing with Trayvon Martin, and we are Trayvon. I remember this was suggested on a whim. Let's come up with this concept and let's see if we can make it flow. Who can you all reach out to who will be a part of this? And I had a contact list, and I said, well, I know 2 people I could reach out to who will let me know immediately if they can or if they can't do it. It won't be any drama. The 2 people I reached out to, Spike Lee, I just did a story with him. He was actually in New York working on a Broadway production with Mike Tyson. And I also reached out to Dwayne Wade. Dwayne Wade, within 3 days, he was prepared and ready for his photo shoot. Spike Lee did it in a day. We also had Trayvon Martin's family, and we also had actor Boris Kodjoe. The concept was to have them in hoodies. We are Trayvon. This was 2013. Now, I don't know how many of you remember the goodness of Ebony Jr., but Mr. Johnson not only addressed adults, but he also addressed children. It was important to reach out to the youth. So there was Sonny and Honey, and Sonny had his big afro and his glasses because it was cool to be a nerd. That's okay, and to wear a bow tie. And then we had Honey, and she had her large afro puffs. We also had the Jacksons on the cover. And what's interesting, as I mentioned, Mr. Johnson was a mentor to Michael Jackson. Michael was also an artist, and some of his early drawings were found in Ebony Jr. Now, I have these to show you. What's interesting is that both of these stories were before my duration at Johnson, but this Jet magazine cover speaks to how you never knew who was going to come by. Someone famous was always going through one door and coming out the other. Sometimes you have 3 and 4 people of high profile. So Mr. Johnson gets a call from Dick Gregory. I want to come by and bring some friends with me. Sure. He comes in, and from what I understand, here we have his friends, John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And they were in awe of the Johnson Publishing building, as everyone had that same feeling. They ended up coming by just for a visit with their buddy, Dick Gregory, and landed on the cover of Jet magazine, where he said for the first time how Black stars changed his life. Next to it is an Ebony article about Petey Snipes. We've heard about progeria, but the African American community didn't necessarily know about it. Our magazines educated people, not only educated us about ourselves, but educated the world about who we were, who we are as a race, as a people. The world met P.D. Snipes and learned about progeria, and it was on the pages of Ebony magazine. And this I thought was interesting. Sometimes we take people for granted. We don't always appreciate the greatness that's in front of us. And going to work each and every day, I never thought to take a picture with Mr. Johnson, because when you're working with someone, you're in that mode for work. But in 2003, well, every year we'd have these great Christmas parties. And for some reason in 2003, something told me to ask Mr. Johnson, can I take a picture with him? And by this time, he was in a wheelchair. He was a very proud man. So he stood up and he held onto a table to maintain his balance. And we took this picture. And I realized later that I had taken a picture with the Johnson family. To his side was Eunice Johnson and Linda Johnson Rice. And I didn't realize it until later that I had a family portrait with the Johnson family. And the picture next to it, this used to be a painting that sat in the lobby of the 820 South building and Succeed. It was painted by Raymond A. Thomas. This picture was taken on May 30th, 2014. It was my last day after 19 years at Johnson Publishing Company. And I felt free. It was painful, but I felt free because I didn't have to be afraid anymore. And I said, thank you.
I totally understand that.
Everything is in divine order. And this was the last picture I took before I left. And this is my slide presentation. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Wow. I mean, even just those covers and going through the history and you explaining those stories. I mean, it's probably, I think, hard for the current generation to really grasp just how monumental Ebony magazine and Jet magazine and even the other publications under Johnson Publishing Company were in terms of encapsulating what the Black community was about. As you can probably just tell, even from this shift in the covers, there were probably tonal shifts of the magazine as things happen within the world. I think when you showed the 2010 cover with Martin Luther King and Samuel L. Jackson, that's actually an Ebony memorial issue from when King was assassinated.
You are correct. And that was the first time in the history where that banner was Black.
Black, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But I want to acknowledge, I do see some Johnson colleagues.
I do.
Lynette Galloway, and I haven't seen her since I left the company. So I'm so
I have not seen her in ages.
She did some of those beautiful covers. And then also one of the baddest, and I do mean good. And I know that grammatically, but I have Rimma Smith.
Yes.
She is one of the best copy editors, and she is also the niece of Dick Gregory. And I love to tell people that story. So these wonderful stories. We had so many people who worked at the company who had relations, who were related to a lot of the notables as well. And it really was a family, and it's just wonderful to see everyone. So some of these people helped us to make history. We didn't do it alone. We all ran the race together until the very end. So it's just wonderful to see what John H. Johnson did and to know that we were a part of that legacy as well in documenting history for African Americans. These publications were like textbooks, history books, as I noted in my 2013 dissertation. I wanted to show the John H. Johnson, to introduce him into the academic canyon as an adult educator, because his magazines were like books, they were textbooks. They taught us. They taught the world. They were sources of pride, and not just with the magazines, but as Brandi mentioned, with the cosmetic line. There was a time when African American women couldn't find cosmetics. We come in various shades, and we couldn't have cosmetics. A one size fit all shade just didn't work with us. So EBONY Fashion Fair was something that we had, and it went from even hair care products, Ravine and Duke. Then there was something called the American Black Achievement Awards. Then there was also, who remembers Ebony Jet Showcase? There was also WJPC, where the fly jock, Tom Joyner, got his start, where he flew from Chicago to Texas, if I'm correct. And he got his start at Johnson. So there were a lot of people whose careers got started right at 820 South Michigan Avenue.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that about the connection. I told this story to Brandi when I interviewed her for Revision Path, but I have a bit of a connection as well. So Eunice Johnson, who's Johnny Johnson's wife, is from Selma.
Yes.
Her and my grandmother grew up together.
Okay.
And so whenever Fashion Fair did their, they would do their tour to different cities, they would always come to Selma. And I never really understood why that was the case, because my mom and my grandma, like, they made a big to do about it. They got all dressed up and went to the fashion show and everything. And I'm like, why are they coming here? And I didn't find out until I was a teenager when my mom had told me that, like, yeah, Eunice and your grandma, like, they went to school together. They grew up together. I'm like, really? I had no clue at all about kind of that, like, Selma connection. So,
and what was beautiful about that is that she was able to go to the fashion houses to hand these fashions. She didn't borrow them, she bought them.
Like, the building was full of designer gowns, something just stored in the building. Like, it was amazing to just walk into some of these rooms and just at any moment can have like Oscar de la Renta, or like just full-length gowns and fur coats and just pieces from designers that they owned, like she said, never rented them. And it was just amazing to walk into these rooms at any given moment. You're like, wait, I'm in the wrong space. This is amazing. But I'm in the wrong space.
And one thing she wanted to do was to bring this world of fashion to the people. Because a lot of African Americans were not exposed to this. Some of the designers, Issey Miyake, and Emmanuel Ngara, Yves Saint Laurent, and we would just, all of this was a world that she wanted to create, and it went to a wonderful cause. It always helped organizations, African American organizations, and it was always kicked off by sororities. We're seeing Kamala Harris, and people are starting to learn Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. But Eunice W. Johnson was a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, which always did the kickoff show. And Mr. Johnson was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, as was the late Robert E. Johnson. Lest we not forget, Lerone Bennett was an illustrious member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. And then we had Irabelle Thompson, who was one of the first early women at EBONY, who was a managing editor. She was a member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. Today celebrates its 98th anniversary, in which I am a proud member as well.
All right. I want to kind of, we've talked a lot about the history of these publications. I really kind of want to bring it back to the present. It's 2020. This year is EBONY Magazine's 75th anniversary. How do you feel about where the brand is now? Brandi, why don't you start off?
I see my colleagues smiling. And we just have like this inside joke, like.
I am speechless right now. It's not, I'll say, coming from being there in some of the height of the brand, and being there sort of at the end of different transitions and management shifts. It's a little bittersweet to sort of see it in the state. I am excited and happy that it has been able to continue and be able to sort of like rebrand itself for current times. And I'm excited for that. However, I'm a little sad of the history that I know it to be, and how does it maintain that piece while being rebranded for a new audience and a new platform. And so for me, it's bittersweet. It's awesome that they are still able to get the name and the brand out there, but I fear that the history of who Ebony Jet Johnson Publishing, John H. Johnson was, will at some point get lost in the rebranding of targeting this new audience of a younger generation. So for me, it's a little bittersweet. It's awesome that we are at 75 years, and but it's a little disheartening of not knowing how does the history get preserved as things continue to shift.
And that's a great point, echoing what Brandi's sentiments. It's bittersweet, but something, as my dear friend Rimmer Smith says, there's a shelf life and expiration date for everything. Nothing lasts forever. But true. History can be preserved. I remember specifically in 2010, I was very, Michelle Obama used the term low-key depression. I didn't know that term exists, but maybe that's what it was. I could see what he created crumbling, and it was very difficult for me. And I thought to myself, how do I make certain that people never forget this man and what it is that he did? And it's through education. We must teach, because we keep people alive through education. And I wanted to show, once again, to introduce John H. Johnson into the academic canyon for what he did as an educator in educating the world about who African Americans are, not who you think we are, but who we are as a people. And in doing that, it's important that we not forget the man, his mission, or his message.
Yep.
He died in 2005, and he created a great legacy. But everything after 2005, I had to realize that's not of him.
Yeah.
That is an extension of what he did, and there is a difference. Yep. But what he did, he was able to make things work. Was it easy? No, it was difficult. And in all honesty, there were cracks in the seams. Things were starting to unravel towards the end. But it's important that we never forget. What's missing now is that we are in a space with media where we have newer digital media platforms where anyone basically can be a journalist. Citizen journalism is what we're seeing at best, where if you're in the right place at the wrong time and you have a camera, you could document a story. So a lot of people constitute and think that this is journalism. What Ebony and Jet did was that it documented, it chronicled our history. And that is something that that never happened. You could go back and research a certain person, and you could trail everything that happened with that person. We think about 1955 and Emmett Till. Before that picture, there were stories in Jet magazine that mentioned Chicago boy is missing. And there were follow-up stories before it got to everything that happened. And those stories were followed up after it happened. And that is what I miss, because we have platforms. Mainstream media doesn't always tell our story from a lens of understanding. And we have so many online sources that, where do you go for that one place to find out what really happened? And that's how the wires get crossed, because sometimes you're wondering, is this a legitimate news source? Well, everyone knew when it came to Jet Magazine, if it didn't happen in Jet, it didn't happen. Because as Red Fox dubbed it, it was considered the Negro Bible. What was in Jet was the word. No one questioned it, okay? EBONY Magazine as well. And that's what I miss. And that's what makes it difficult this year as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of EBONY, that is no more as we once knew it.
You're on mute, Maurice.
What do you think about some of the current offerings in media? Like I'm thinking Essence Magazine or The Roots, which are kind of some more well-established Black media publications. What do you think about sort of how they fit into this piece?
Well, The Root is an online media source, and it's doing a great job with keeping everyone abreast of what's happening in the African American community. And with Essence Magazine, it was always, interestingly enough, John H. Johnson had a small stake in Essence as well. So his hands, his tentacles were everywhere. But with Essence Magazine, they always had it on lockdown when it came to writing about women. And that's something that they continue to do. And that platform, that space is much needed, because we need to hear stories from women and women of color. And The Root, the Griot, places like that do a really great job of keeping everyone updated on what's happening with African Americans, as does The Undefeated.
Brandi, what about you? What do you think?
I agree with what Margena is saying, but I do feel to a certain extent some of the publications get their wires crossed in becoming more blog-like. Sometimes because there's a delicate dance between people that want to be informed and people who want to be entertained. And online presence has made it so easy and instant for you to be entertained by anything. So to Margena's original point, I feel a lot of publications are doing a great job for the most part, but I do feel that sometimes they jump into the pool of let's be entertainers and post the latest blogging story. And sometimes it lacks the authenticity, the originality, the credibility of what is being reported. And sometimes it's just, let's be the first one to get out there and put it out. And we lack some of that detail and some of the history of what we're reporting, because we need to be entertainers and entertain a different demographic. And I feel at some point, the publications have to decide, are we informative or are we entertainers? And being comfortable that that means you may lose some readers because you are not trying to post every 20 minutes the latest story about entertainment. Even though EBONY is an entertainment magazine, I don't expect them to post the same stories that daily bloggers would post, because I'm expecting a different level of information and articles to be posted. So I think in that sense, that's where I struggle with some of the brands, because it's almost like they're doing this little dance of we're providing context and articles that are relevant, but then randomly get dropped into the pool of like an entertainment story that has nothing to do with the foundation of who they are.
Yeah.
And identity is important. EBONY Magazine, from its very name, established the identity of who the audience for these publications. And EBONY Magazine, you learned about politicians, you learned about those from religious sectors, you learned about everything. There was even a section cooking, where people learned the latest dishes, and then you got to see fashion. those magazines established identities, and he was able to master what I call edutainment, which is education and entertainment. You learned about the celebrities, or as he said it best, his mother taught him about orange juice and castor oil. The celebrities and entertainment was the orange juice, because people like to find out what's going on in the life of a high profile person, but sometimes you need medicine. But it's easier to capture someone's attention with the celebrity, but you keep the attention with the medicine, because this is what you need to know. So we would often have stories about celebrities where we would educate you about those celebrities' lives and who they are, and how they are so much more than just razzle dazzle. That was the beauty of what we did. We didn't just showcase, okay, they're on stage. There was even a section that they would do where you would go to the homes of the celebrities to see how they lived. With Jet Magazine, in addition to the beauty of the week, there was also the week's best photos, where they were always celebrity driven, but celebrities felt comfortable showing and introducing us to their families. And that's something that didn't happen. I remember watching Denzel Washington's family, his children grow up on the pages of Jet Magazine, and John David, also a Morehouse man. I remember him as a small child, and now he's following in his dad's footsteps. I remember watching Diana Ross's children, her family grow up, and now we see Tracy Ellis Ross. So we got to meet people's families, entertainers on those pages. So that was education. We don't get that. We just see a celebrity story, but there's no substance to it. And people are also sacrificing facts. Yes. So you have something that's tantalizing and interesting, but most times it's just totally lacking credibility. Yep. So authenticity, but it's possible to have the orange juice and the castor oil. Give entertainment, but also give us something of substance to stand behind it. Like with the Dick Gregory story. It was more than just Dick Gregory, John Lennon. No one wouldn't, if you know the history of music, you know that the Beatles' first record deal was in Chicago, Record Road. Okay, so they were in Chicago. They knew the history. The Playboy Mansion, where Dick Gregory was, they were based in Chicago. So that history taught people something. People learned about John Lennon in a way. People didn't realize that connection with him and Dick Gregory. That was entertainment, but it was also education.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't want to take the spotlight off of Margena and Brandi at all, but I just I just need to leap in real quick. No, I just wanted to just make just a quick point that I think what I think is most important to say is, like, the publications were really rooted in love and celebration of all facets of Black lives. And so it really created an environment where you could tell all of these stories, even if they were just like gossipy stories, but without them feeling sensationalized. Yes. So you really had a place where, you know, people felt like they could trust their stories, good or bad, in our publications. And I think that that's what's missing from these online platforms, is that they don't have a relationship with these celebrities or politicians or, you know, other figures, where they feel like, I mean, everything just kind of comes off as gossip, or, you know, just, you know, just kind of like gotcha moments, rather than really feeling like there's a relationship. And now we're sharing a little bit of this, you know, story about them too, but we know it's done in love, and we know it's done with care, and it's done with this point of view that we just want to make our I guess the race or our community better overall, and really tell those key stories that they need to know. Okay, I'll shut up.
No, that was great. Thank you for.
I agree. Yes, that is exactly the point that I was trying to make of the lack of relationships. It becomes very much so a gossip blog like post, and it isn't. There was a way that you all would write these stories that could expose some very deep and dark information about the celebrity that was being featured, but somehow be able to do it in such empathy and understanding and compassion, and then bring it back around to, you know, what they're doing now and how they are overcoming and on the other side of things. It was never a focus on just, oh, this person did this, or, oh, we heard about this. Media today is very sensational of, sometimes you don't even get the right article with the title that's being stated. You know, you'll get a title for clickbait that has nothing to do with what the article is about. And it's very misleading, and it's almost, it's like, I don't know if you guys have watched the Netflix series, but where they talk about social media and how it is, it's designed this way, you know, and that incorrect information in the media is ideal. And I feel like we are going down the rabbit hole of being okay with providing incorrect information just for clicks, which is then monetized. And that's where I feel current media kind of is struggling with keeping integrity and then getting viewership and money.
Right, right, and not having those relationships. And that was the beauty that helped to build the brands, is that, as I mentioned early on in the conversation, how people stayed at the company for decades. So you knew everyone. You could pick up the phone. Like I mentioned to you about Michael Jackson and how she was able to call him every week and until she won his, he knew her from his days as a child, but I don't know what you're going to do because I saw what somebody else did to me. But their relationship, and that's something that a lot of news outlets don't have because people don't trust. That the phrase fake news, people think that it's something that's new. It's been popularized probably within the last few years, but fake news, how many of you remember Star magazine or the Inquirer, you know, oh, I was kidnapped by a UFO, or you know, Bigfoot is the baby's daddy, you know, all of these stories. So fake news isn't anything new, but it is making people have a little more hesitation in terms of believing what is factual from what isn't.
Yeah, and I would also say, speaking to that, you know, kind of sensationalism, what ends up happening is that some of these Black media outlets, and I'm not naming any of them specifically by name, now because of what they report and how they report it, now celebrities have a very negative view of talking to Black media, not necessarily to media as a whole, but specifically to Black media outlets. They're like, I don't know, this might turn up in the blogs, or this might be on the, well, I'll name the Shade Room because it's the Shade Room, but like there's now this kind of hesitance, and there's this wall now between, you know, I would say Black celebrities, Black, you know, entertainers, public figures, etc., to talking to Black media, that, you know, Ebony really kind of was the bridge between that I don't think a lot of other Black media outlets now, unfortunately, can do. They can't bridge that gap.
Yeah, and it's I remember when Bill Cosby was going through the well, still going through things. He made a comment, and I don't know how many people remembered it, but he said, "It is my hope that the Black media does not follow, but hear me out." And there was a time, because of relationships, we want to talk to you. No one at the time could just pick up the phone and do that.
Yeah.
But we had that relationship with Ebony and Jet Magazine. It was that kind of backing because people knew what we stood for. And speaking of integrity, and Brandi mentioned how we were able to pull things out of people that others couldn't. This beautiful cover behind me of Jennifer Hudson, I mentioned how when I did this interview, I remember the publicist was like, don't ask any questions about the family or what happened. And of course, I had no intention. So she kept hammering that in. Well, when she gets the story on the cover is about, and that fateful night, what happened? And it was just like Brandi said. Jennifer had history and she felt comfortable. And I didn't ask her a question about her family. It was just the way we were talking about something and it triggered a moment, and she felt comfortable. And she said, I never read my own press and I never read my stories. She read that cover story and she follows me on Twitter. That was a very touching moment for me. And it just came out, and no questions about the family. But that was something she shared, and it was picked up by all the major newswire service. It was actually even a story that was on the cover of the Chicago Tribune, about how she mentioned she was supposed to be at home with her family that day. She was going to spend the night, but she chose to go to Florida instead.
Wow. Wow. I'm trying to think what's a good way to kind of end this off. I guess I can sort of share how this sort of all came to fruition. So in June of this year, of course, there were, massive protests and marches and things around the country because of the death of George Floyd. And it really got me to thinking about how would Ebony cover this? Like, how would a publication like Ebony cover this? Especially seeing how much of social media was sort of gathering around the cause and sharing, information. Also, during the same month, what I saw was a meme around people creating magazine covers. The meme initially started off with people saying, "Oh, show the cover from the month and the year that you were born from Vanity Fair." And I looked to see, I was like, "Oh, let me look and see." But I was born in March of 1981. Vanity Fair hadn't published during that time. And so I think I saw someone else on Twitter mention, "Oh, we'll post the Ebony and Jet cover from, like the day and the month, or the month and the year that you were born." And, for those that are interested, you can actually go onto Google Books. There's, I think, decades of old Ebony magazines, old Jet magazines, etc. And I'd say probably for about a good month and a half, I was just diving through the archives, because one thing was to sort of see how Ebony talked about kind of times like this where there was mass social unrest, and seeing just what the opinions of people were back then. I was able to read and see when Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday kind of first became a big deal when it was being passed nationwide. I got to see the article that Dr. Christian mentioned, sort of the memorial article for Martin Luther King, and seeing how companies back then were posting black squares for racial solidarity, much like they were doing now in 2020. And so it really had me thinking, like, how could this sort of current moment that's happening right now in the world, the racial unrest, the pandemic, et cetera, how would Ebony cover it? How could Ebony cover it? And so that's really kind of been the impetus for this entire conversation here. Does anybody kind of have any just final thoughts, just sort of some things to end off with before we open it up to the audience for questions and answers?
When you asked, so the last thing you stated, was that rhetorical when you were inquiring how Ebony would cover it? Because each day I think to myself, when I hear about stories, I would envision us around the editorial table, and we would go and we would interview family members. We would interview those people who were behind the camera, and we covered stories that other people weren't covering. How did those people's lives change based upon what they did? And we would just find these stories and just take it to a different level. And every time I see something happen, I just miss what we did and what we represented. And whenever we lose someone great, I miss our tribute issues. Behind me is a tribute issue with Bernie Mac. And we had archival pictures of people's beginnings in the industry. You just don't find that anywhere. No one else has that kind of history that we had. And our approaches to stories were unique. And that's what I miss, is just being able to listen and to hear other people share thoughts about, hey, let's cover this, or let's figure out why all of these things are happening, like we did with the We Are Trayvon cover. I just missed that.
Yeah, I would say my last thought would be that I hope that conversations like this will continue, so that we are able to keep legacy and the history of all of these great publications alive, specifically John H. Johnson and Johnson Publishing Company, because as media continues to evolve, as we continue to consume media in different forms, and who knows what we'll be doing in the next 2 to 3 years. You know, at one point the internet was, it was unbelievable that we'd ever have something on this level and this platform and be able to have these conversations in our living room. So my thought would be that in whatever evolution we're in, that we're able to continue these conversations so that we are keeping the history of these publications alive, and sort of educating, like you said, Margena, educating each generation so that they know and have sort of a baseline of what being a credible publication is about.
Well said. Well said.
I'm sorry, I have a friend who's trying to get in. He's trying to get in. He just texted me.
Betsy's got it.
Okay.
Betsy's on it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, no. I was going to say thank you, Brandi Davis, Dr. Margena Christian. Thank you both.
Thank you.
For sharing your insights, sharing your thoughts, your memories, and everything about your time at Johnson Publishing Company, working with Ebony Magazine, Jet Magazine. I'd love to open it up for questions from the audience. I see a couple of, I see a lot of comments here in the chat, but yeah, please fire away with questions.
Yeah, I did see a couple questions.
Yes.
One in particular from Emma about how did we move on from Johnson. We didn't both leave in 2014. I left in, when was it, Jesus? I think it was 2011. Yeah, it was a Friday the 13th. I know that much. It was. I had bad feelings about it the entire time. But I had been on a medical leave for about 1.5 years and came off my medical leave. And during that time, a lot of transitions had happened. And so the department that I was in had completely restructured. And so my role as it existed was no longer. And so when I left there, I went to Blue Cross Blue Shield, and it was a culture shock, and it was a struggle for me because I had been at an entertainment company for the last 8 to 9 years to go to a very corporate company. And it was a struggle of just being able to create, being able to sort of make connections with people, being able to find my role, my way within a department that I was in. I struggled a lot because I got so used to having that family structure and the support that when I got there, everyone was siloed, you know, and it was hard to connect with people. And so I think I probably made it there about 6 months before I had to leave to go because it just was a huge struggle for me to just find my way. And so it probably took me about 1 year to sort of find a good spot to be at, so that I felt sort of like, not that I needed to feel like family, but I felt like I had a place and I belonged.
For me, the adjustment, I felt like it was divine order. I always knew, especially after when I earned my doctorate in 2013, I always knew that I should have left sooner than I did, but it was very difficult. And I always liken it to being in a bad marriage where you stay because you love the person and you just don't want to leave. But I always knew that something bigger, God would have to move me, and he did. Mm-hmm. So for me, the timing was orchestrated just well, because when I left in 2014, I went to UIC in 2015. They were just starting their professional writing concentration, and they hired me to help them build it. And that's what I've been doing. And the program is growing, and I have been growing. I went into UIC as a visiting lecturer. Then I became a lecturer. And then just recently, I was promoted to senior lecturer, and I won the Teacher Recognition Program Award. So I feel like God has placed me where I should be. I learned about the publishing industry from not the world's greatest African-American publisher, but from one of the world's greatest publishers. And I am able to teach my students about editing and publishing. I teach them about writing. And I'm also in a good spot because I still am very fortunate. I did have Ebony reach out, even under new owners and new editors. They reached out to me to write stories. I wrote 2 stories for the tribute issue with Muhammad Ali. I did the Tyler Perry story. I did a February Love issue story. So I was still able to do some things with Ebony, even though I left the company. And I still find that joy in writing. Like I said, I'm writing with Oxford University Press's American National Biography. So I'm excited. I was just given Donna Summer and Aaliyah to write. So that's due next month. But that's a biographical encyclopedia or for those who are deceased. And it was interesting to write about people we read about, but when you work alongside someone and you have to document that person's legacy, it's an honor. And to have been able to do that with Lerone Bennett and to do that with John Johnson and Eunice W. Johnson in an academic space, which is what I set out to do. My goal was to teach at the collegiate level and to make certain that people never forget John H. Johnson, the man, the mission, or his message. And I was able to do that through my research in 2013 and also in 2018 with the book that I published, which is Empire, the House that John H. Johnson built. And I see Raymond A. Thomas, who is also another Johnson Publishing. He was the art director for the company, and he also designed this beautiful cover as well. It was family. It continues to be family, but I feel like everything was in divine order. And I do miss my family, but I have made some great friendships at the collegiate level. I'm at UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago.
Awesome.
Can I ask a question? Quick question.
Yes.
Dr. Christian, did you ask Reverend Jesse Jackson to write the introduction to that book?
I did. I had no intentions on publishing the book myself, but I knew how to do it. And what did I mention about relationships? And with, I actually wanted to find someone else, and that person did not agree to do it. And I only went to that other person because Reverend Jackson was so hard to get hold of. But I had like this deadline to meet and he agreed to do it. And the reason I reached out to him was because few people realize it, but when he was a student at North Carolina A&T University, when he came back to Chicago, it was in divinity school. He was married, he had 2 children, he didn't have a job. And his mother was a member of the same church that John H. Johnson's mother was a member of. So Reverend Jackson's first job was at Johnson Publishing Company. He wanted to work in the mailroom, but Mr. Johnson said, no, you have the gift for speaking to people. I'm going to give you a car and I want you to go around on the South Side and I want you to sell ads. So he sold advertising and magazines, and that was his first job. He always said when he moved to Chicago and needed a job, Mayor Daley offered him a job as a toll collector, but John H. Johnson saw something so much greater. He said he offered him the job to train him to become a world leader.
Wow.
I'm not sure there's a better place to end than that, but we could probably take another question if anybody has one. That's an amazing story. Oh.
Didn't mean to shut down questions. I just thought it was an amazing story.
I saw Emma had a question.
Yeah, there was another question in there.
Oh.
About, I wonder what it would take to reintroduce that level of trust back into media in general. I think we were talking about, or I was talking about how now it seems like Black celebrity stars, et cetera, public figures, there's like that hesitance to talk to Black media because there might be this, I don't know, sort of gotcha thing. It might end up being gossip or something like that.
Yes, that all harkens back to instability, not having the relationships, the connections. These were brands that have been proven, tried, tested, and true. You knew if you were going to be in Jet and Ebony, you didn't have to worry about one of those "I got you" type of stories. You always knew that the stories were going to be of high quality. And that question is great, Emma. It's a matter of people just being able to trust again. We're in a climate, unfortunately, that doesn't make this something that's a reality, because most companies don't hire people permanently. There are a lot of freelancers. So if you do a story with a freelancer, that person could sell your story and it's all over the place. That's not what you signed up for. You agreed to do an interview with this publication. Well, that writer is freelance and that person is making money in other places. So that's a real sticky situation. How to bring back that trust. And in this climate of the fake news, the fake media, it just really makes it difficult for people to feel comfortable sharing stories like they once did.
Yeah, I think so like what I was saying earlier of one, like you said, building those relationships back and building trust there, but then also the publications taking the stance of reporting with integrity and knowing that they may lose some audiences or they may lose some freelancers depending on what their stance is. And so if they set the standard of we're going to only report from a level of integrity and realizing that these celebrities are also human, then that sets a standard that regardless of the freelancer, if you are not capable of producing an article that follows the values, then they need to be able to say, we can't report, we can't post this. And it has to be, to your point, Margena, a way to protect that material, that intellectual property within that publication so that that freelancer is not able to shop that article with another publication. And so it's just sort of creating a structure within the company that is on a foundation of integrity, and then protecting that intellectual property so that these articles are not fished out to other places because that one publication says, no, this isn't within the standards of what we would want to publish. And that sort of will help. I don't know if it solves it, but it at least help that from that celebrity standpoint of knowing that, yes, I did this article, having that understanding of respect for them, of like, out of respect of you and how we want our relationship to continue, we didn't feel that this story speaks to that. And so we don't want to move forward, but we like the opportunity to do another interview at a different time. I don't know if it solves it, but it at least starts to build some more trust in knowing that you're only interested in publishing what is factual and within standards of what your brand speaks for.
And also going back to integrity and relationships, I think about Chadwick Boseman and how he continued to work. And people saw him in pictures and how he drastically lost weight, and people made speculations and people laughed at him. We would have had a relationship where we would have said something is amiss. And we had such integrity where publicists trusted us. We would call, hey, what's going on? That person would share and know that we would not go behind their back and there's a big story plaster he's quietly dealing with. Hey, what's going on? This is what oh, wow. Do you think he want to talk about it? Do you think he want to share? We had that kind of connection where we could do that. And everyone doesn't have that gift and that ability. We would have taken that moment and turned it into a teachable moment to show how through all of it, even while he filmed Black Panther, he was quietly in the battle for his life. But he finished the race strong. And there's another project, his last project, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which will be on Netflix. He did all of that while he dealt with cancer. We would have been able to get that story to find out, and it wouldn't have been sensationalized. And that is something that takes years of building up. And there are people out there who do have that skill. Unfortunately, they're not necessarily at publications that are that might be deemed reputable or credible, because we chronicled history, and you knew what you were getting, and that's important.
Maurice, I think we've got you on mute.
No, can you all hear me?
There you are. Now we can.
So here. No, I said, does anyone have any questions? Like if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, I think we have a couple of minutes left.
Someone asked me about the photo archives. Those, yeah, the photo archives were sold, and a conglomerate purchased them, but some of the images ended up going to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and then in DC, and then some of the other images ended up going to Getty Research Institute in LA. And yeah.
Yeah, I was curious about that, Margena, because you know how vast that photo archive was.
Yes.
And of course, you know my irritation of having them farm it out to someone else when I was there.
Yes.
But also the library. Where did the whole library go? And the artwork and
great question. The library actually went to the Stony Island Arts Bank, Theaster Gate on Stony Island, where all of those books are located. You can also see the desk that Mr. Johnson had on the 11th floor. Actually, his furniture, the 11th floor, is there as well. And then the artwork, that's the $1 million question. Things we would notice, we would go into the building and pieces of artwork would just start disappearing from the walls. So we don't have a clue where a lot of artwork went, but it's things just disseminated all over the place, and it's bittersweet. Yeah. But yes. And Jessica, you asked me a question earlier about how did I get to Reverend Jackson? And I want to thank this gentleman, Mr. David Day, who works with Reverend Jackson. And he was the one who so graciously helped me to get in contact with Reverend Jackson. And that's how that happened, which goes back to relationships and who you know. My attorney knows David Day. And then he said, hey, I have my client, she's working on a book. She's been trying to reach out to Reverend Jackson. Hey, do you think you could do it? Spoke to Reverend Jackson in 2 days, and that's how it happened. So relationships matter. We learned that from John Johnson as well. He said, you have to build trust. He said, people will not buy from you. People will not follow you if they don't trust you. He said, you can't make fun of people. You can't put people down. And people will tell you, African Americans are some of the most loyal when it comes to something that they believe in and stand for, such as was demonstrated with the history of the empire and all of the many things that John H. Johnson brought to the table.
Maurice, you have a final word to say to everybody?
Do I have a final word? I mean, I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation, particularly at this point in time nearing the end of the year. I always look at this as kind of a time for just reflection in general. And so I'm just really glad to be able to talk to Dr. Christian, talk to Brandi, and even to hear from other people who are here today who worked at Johnson Publishing Company and also are sharing their, memories and sharing their knowledge about what it's like to be there. I mean, for me, it's just amazing to hear about all of this. This also, this kind of came about, I mentioned about seeing this on social media, but I remember also on LinkedIn, maybe a couple of months ago, Tristan Walker, the entrepreneur who owns Walker and Company, Bevel Skincare, etc., he made a LinkedIn post where he was asking about Ebony, saying that this was the 75th anniversary, and kind of asking people, can it come back, or should it come back, or how can it come back? And I was just surprised that the majority of the people that were responding, most of them, I would say younger people, were like, no, just let it die. Like, something better will come along. Will something better come along? Perhaps, but like, there's just so much history. I mean, Ebony started in 1945. I mean, through Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights era, through the 80s, 90s to now. I mean, there's just so much history